and why, and defense tips.
Thank you
and
very
a round
much.
of applause, please. Thank you.
Thank you. That's 1 to 4. Yeah, perfect. Thank you very much. So thank you all for being here for the last talk for today. It's been a great day, a lot of great talks, and we have to make a great finish for the end. So my colleague Marius and I are going to talk today about living on the edge, evicting threat actors from perimeter appliances. And first of all, before we go into depth and talk about some forensic stuff and some exploits and what's happening right now, we first need to define what exactly edge devices are, so we all know about what we are talking today. And basically, what we're referring to as edge device is something that sits on the edge of your internet between your company and the internet. Something which is reachable from the internet, like it should be, like a perimeter firewall, for example, it should be reached from the internet, obviously. Like virtual desktop environments, asset management, and stuff like that. So there's a lot of things which are considered edge devices. And additionally, we're also considering edge appliances. So appliance, again, something which you get from your manufacturer, like a box, which is plug-in, which works. And it does its job, and it's secure, more or less. And to put it all a bit more into perspective, what we want to talk today about is edge devices, exploits, and initial access. So basically, what you can see here is a slide from Florian Roth. You maybe know him. And he summarized all the common entry vectors. So on the top, you can see phishing. I think you all know what phishing is. At the bottom, you can see brute force, like passwords, guessing, credential stuffing, all stuff like that. But we are targeting now the middle box, the exploitation. And to be precise, we're targeting this middle box, the vulnerable appliances like Ivanti, Fortinet, Cisco, and stuff like that. There are also some other names. We're going to talk about them in a second. But this is the focus of our talk today. So how can you get, as a threat actor, initial access via a vulnerable appliance?
Thank you very much. Okay, let's first establish some context on why this topic actually matters, first from the perspective of an attacker. So edge devices are usually quite easy to compromise, yet it is difficult for the defenders or the victim to detect the actual access to internal resources and that they're present. Also, a big issue with these edge devices is that their operating system and software are very outdated. I brought an example from Ivanti ConnectSecure, which is a VPN appliance. It has a Perl version of version 5.6.1, 32-bit, which was built in April 2001. And I'm pretty confident there are people here in the room that are younger than this. So that tells you everything, I guess. Also, most of these devices lack basic exploit mitigations. So this is far off from those mitigations that we see on modern desktop platforms. And lastly, these appliances are extremely volatile. A reboot or software update could wipe all forensic evidence that an actor even accessed the device anytime in the past. And forensics is very challenging and time-consuming on these devices. So yeah, that's why we're here. From the defender's perspective, from our point of view, it's an imperfect target because we usually don't have file system access. Some vendors even encrypt the data at rest, so that disk forensic is not an option most of the time. And in that case, normally the OS resides in memory. That's why the artifacts are so volatile. And also, most vendors don't allow direct operating system shell access. So you get these weird challenge response shells where you have to contact the customer support first, and they peer over your shoulder so you don't do naughty things with the appliance, which is an issue as well. Dumping memory, therefore, is also pretty difficult as well, and most vendors use some kind of proprietary encrypted form in case you can do dumps. And the last problem are the trust me bro integrity checking tools. Ivanti is a big offender in that regard. Basically, they have a tool running on the appliance itself, which you can tell to run an integrity check. You have to trust the appliance that it actually does that. And even if you get a result, you can't trust that because it's running on the compromised device itself. And this tool is mainly implemented through checking hashes and some sanity checks on the file system. So it's not really a good indicator that the device is clean or compromised. And even Ivanti got that message somehow, somewhen, and it was kind of a mind-blowing discovery for them that some threat actors actually actively manipulated the tool. Yeah, so there's that. Right, so now we come to our four main actors for today. That's Ivanti, Fortinet, Citrix, and Cisco, in no particular order. But somehow most of them are involved in some way if we are called for an incident. So, yeah. Let's start off with the case one. That's Cisco IOS XE. And we'll take a short trip back in time to late 2023. Some of you might say, okay, that's a bit far off. Might be old news. But trust me, it's still very recent news. I will come to that in a few slides. But basically, back in 2023, there was one or two, we didn't really know, vulnerabilities in Cisco IOS XE devices. And Cisco published this to generally raise awareness that these issues exist, but didn't provide any actual proof or indicators of compromise. And we suspect that this campaign was highly targeted, but after Cisco published this information in general, the actors switched to a internet-wide exploitation campaign to kind of muddy the waters. And that's where we came in, because we didn't have any information or indicators what to look for. So what we did is we set up honeypots using actual Cisco devices and monitored them for exploitation. Yeah, so as a short introduction, what is Cisco IOS XE? It runs on a lot of devices, which equals an enormous attack surface. We have routers, wireless equipment, and switches, for example. And the general precondition was that the management interface had to be internet exposed for the exploit to be thrown over the internet. We also include data from Shadow Server in all of these cases, so big shout out to them. This is the tracking data that they have for these Cisco vulnerabilities. There are two big gaps in there. That's because of the fingerprinting evasion that the threat actors used. I will come to that when we talk about the implant. And that's why there are annotations for implant version 2 and version 3, because it changed over time as details were uncovered. Yeah, so onto the log and traffic analysis. As I said, we set up honeypots to monitor the situation and to monitor what coyote, that's what the threat actor is named internally at Secure Infra, was doing. We saw in the logs already a couple of strong indicators of what they were doing. At the top, the font may be a bit small, I'm sorry for that. They created a new administrative user named Cisco support to kind of blend in and maybe prolong their persistence for a little bit more. It's also quite obvious that they're using a specific API path, the WebUI WSMA. And you also see in the SE Linux logs that they're writing a particular Nginx configuration file. And yeah, at the bottom there's a screenshot from a packet capture that we created, which basically shows the exploitation activity in progress. And based on these packet captures that we did, we worked together with ET Labs and a couple of other network security vendors to create early detection rules for these vulnerabilities to hopefully uncover some more. Yeah, so onto the vulnerabilities as well. We first have the authentication bypass, which grants the actor access to the iOS D binary, which is a monolithic binary inside of the appliance, which controls the command line interface and all the functions, basically. You could talk to this binary via an API that is called WebUI WSMA HTTP. And through a clever encoding trick, as you can see in the first line at the top right, they could bypass certain security checks in the Nginx configuration that allowed unauthenticated access. So basically, it didn't really matter what kind of credentials you provided, they weren't checked at all. and you could run arbitrary commands as a administrative user on the IOSD subsystem. And from there, if you have access to the unauthenticated API, you can again abuse a different API path, which is called software management install add, which via exploitation grants you access to the lower operating system components. There was a particularly nasty parsing bug in the install method call where they check for an IPv6 address, but they only check if there are 3 colon signs in there. So there's a command injection vulnerability in there, which looks different depending on the version of the operating system that's running on the device, but works either way. All right, let's get into the implant, or what the actor actually dropped after exploitation. We call this implant boulder drop internally. Cisco Talos called it bad candy in their reporting. Yeah, so this is the implant. Maybe some of you expected a binary, but this is actually a tampered with Nginx configuration file. The actor established what's called a nobody but us backdoor here, which basically means they have a direct channel for command injection, which is authenticated by file hashes. And these hashes are unique per exploited device, so they're generated each time. And only the actor who knows these file hashes or like hash sums can access this backdoor. So this is what's tracked as logon hash in the header artifacts. And yeah, this backdoor allows arbitrary command execution again. And depending on the parameters you provide, it returns different HTTP responses. So this was used for fingerprinting. And when the actor noticed that the defenders were on their tracks, they switched up their implementation a bit and provided different responses. So fingerprinting was no longer possible. That's what these dips were in the tracking. Yeah, we were and still are very cautious about attribution at this point. But as it turns out, the activity that we saw is partially overlapping with reporting on Salt Typhoon. There was a report by Recorded Future earlier this year. They call them Red Mike. But yeah, that shows some very striking similarities in the exploitation of these vulnerabilities. And more recently, in June, a Canadian telecom organization was compromised through these exact vulnerabilities because they still weren't patched. And as we heard in the previous talk, thanks for that transition, there was a report from a multinational joint group of many intelligence agencies on the China Nexus activity surrounding these vulnerabilities on Cisco devices. So if you need something to read for the weekend, I recommend this. Yeah. So on to case 2, the Ivanti EPMM. So what is Ivanti EPMM? It's short for Endpoint Management Mobile. It was formerly called Mobile IRAN, if that maybe rings a bell for you. The appliance runs on a base operating system of Red Hat Enterprise Linux. And basically what EPMM does is it manages mobile device configurations on Android and iOS phones. And it also integrates with Microsoft 365 online services. The tracking data from Shadow Server is pretty spotty here. But in total, there are about 4,600 systems out there at the moment. Not all of these are vulnerable, but this is the general number. So onto a short timeline to showcase how quickly the attackers move in some cases. We had the advisory published by Ivanti on the 13th of May. And mere 2 days later, Watchtower Labs, who are usually pretty quick about discovering and replicating these vulnerabilities, published a blog post with a proof of concept. And a mere hour later, we saw the first exploitation attempts logged on the customer appliance that we analyzed afterwards. And from there on, it took only 3 weeks for the customer to realize, whoops, I think we forgot to patch that appliance. So that's where we came in. And yeah, that's how we get to talk about the payloads that we saw in that time. So that's a plus. In total, we saw about 1,000 requests per appliance. And there were, if you boil it down, about 80 unique exploit payloads that we saw. So this ranges from simple payloads like HTTP, DNS, or even ping callbacks to the attacker infrastructure, just to establish whether the service is vulnerable. Then we had a pretty popular one where they dumped the internal MySQL databases for the credentials, for example, of the Active Directory and LDAP users, which also contains the Office or Microsoft 365 credentials, so you could take over arbitrary accounts. We also saw some Krusty Loader payloads. Krusty Loader, if you are not familiar, is a highly evasive Rust backdoor targeting edge devices, for example, Ivanti, but also those of other manufacturers, and is generally attributed to the China Nexus APT realm. Then we had some run-of-the-mill Mirai-based botnet stuff that was floating around, and some hands-on keyboard activity where they downloaded a network scanning tool in Chinese language and tried to probe around the network a bit to see what's up. And lastly, there were also some more or less script kiddie level activities going on where they started a web server on a non-standard port, and it was blocked by the firewall, of course, so they had to come back and do weird things, but I'm not sure what they were trying to do. So investigating these appliances, we have operating system level shell service sections that can be established, but they're restricted to 30 minutes each, so that kind of restricts us in our investigation. But on the plus side, the boot disk is not encrypted, so offline investigation is possible, aka that disk forensic. And we collected most of the artifacts using Unix, the Unix artifact extractor or collector. So the primary artifacts that you will find on these appliances are, for one, the HTTP server logs or Tomcat logs, which show the exploitation attempts. I will not go into the vulnerability in this case more directly because it's Java code and I don't want to go off on a rant. But basically, you could inject code through a code injection vulnerability, and also there was an authentication bypass in there again. So that's kind of the combo you always find in these cases, or most of the time. And the other artifact that we didn't see documented anywhere, as far as we know, is a proprietary log file that the appliance creates, and that logs user logins into the administrative portal. So if there was unauthorized access, you might be able to see something there. And also a big shout out to the colleagues over at Profero who documented some of this workflow previously. Yeah, and so as a last slide on Ivanti, there were also cases where these appliances were, although with a different vulnerability, breached in case of Norway's government, for example. Most likely also by nation-state actors, but yeah. Right, let's move on to case number 3.
Test. Yes, perfect. So case number 3, Citrix NetScaler ADC. Probably everybody knows what NetScaler is. I'm going to skip the definition. And we're not going to talk about 1 or 2 vulnerabilities. We're going to talk about 4 in total. I'll step outside. So basically, to make a bit sense here, we have on the right side, we have some remote code executions. On the left side, we've got some memory reads, where you could read session keys from the Citrix memory and basically replay existing sessions, and therefore skip things like logins and MFA. And on the right side, obviously, you can run unauthenticated code. And also, we can look at the top. It's like the older exploit or vulnerabilities, and on the bottom, we have the newer versions. So you can see like Citrix Bleed 1 and 2, it's kind of similar. And also on the right side, we have 2 RCEs, which are kind of similar in the sense that if you investigate it, it's basically more or less the same. To give you a bit of understanding, so we just saw a timeline about how quickly we have a POC and then we have exploitation. And to make things a bit more clear here also for Citrix, I've tried to compile all the dates for first exploitation, for the security bulletin released by Citrix, for the public POC release, and for the mass exploitation. Now, take these dates with a grain of salt, because obviously we rely here on public data, and not each and every company is gonna disclose that they were breached. So the security bulletin, that's fixed, but the other dates take a bit grain of salt, especially for the POC, because we just looked at public source like GitHub and stuff like that. There's also like dark web source, we didn't look into it. And to summarize it a bit, because you don't have to look at everything, you can look at it at home. Basically to summarize it, which of those vulnerabilities were used as 0 days? We have 2, the Citrix Bleed 1 and the unnamed RCE. And what is especially interesting is here, obviously, the date on the bottom, time from POC to mass exploitation, which is like 2 days, 2 days, 1 day, 7 days. So as soon as the POC drops, mass exploitation starts on edge device, or here in this case, Citrix. But also like dates from bulletin to exploitation is also really short, because of course, if you read the bulletin, you also have some mitigation steps, and you can read out maybe where the vulnerability lies and then develop a POC. So we have quick exploitations, which just showcases, again, with the 2 0 days also, that just patching is not enough. If you patch, and even if you patch in time, you still need to do IOC hunting or investigation and stuff like that to make sure that you're not compromised before the bulletin was released. And even if you patch this 1 week too late, it's maybe already too late. You still need to investigate it. So to showcase a bit of the attack surface, which we're dealing with, because Citrix is a product which is widely used. Again, we're using shadow server data here. Now, one thing to point out is for Citrix Bleed 1 and the RCE, they're a bit older, and this data is just 1 year back, so we didn't see like the big drop. We can see that some instances are patched. We can see here Citrix Bleed 2, the blue one, which drops at the end, so people are patching, which is good. But we still have a lot of vulnerable Citrix appliances reachable from the internet worldwide. This is worldwide, not just Germany or something, it's really worldwide. So all those devices are vulnerable, and for example, Citrix Bleed 2, we are now roughly at, 4K or something. Basically 4K device where we can just read session tokens and retake or overtake sessions. Now, as we have instances for both vulnerabilities, or both categories of vulnerabilities. We're going to group it up a little bit. So on the left side, we've got remote code execution. So how do we analyze it from a forensic point of view? And on the right side, we've got memory read. So basically, first steps for attacker. As soon as he exploits the vulnerability, what are his first steps? On the left side, it's always web shell. So you just drop a web shell, you have the persistence, and execute commands, even after patching or something like that, if it does not remove the web shell. On the right side, we get session keys, so we use them to overtake existing sessions. Basically, we can then use those machines which are deployed in Citrix, and we are already mostly in the Active Directory. Now, post-exploitation, so we did our first steps. What are our next goals? On the left side for RCE, as we are on the appliance itself, we try to deploy some kind of other malware, even some crypto mining, which we saw. Or we try to dump the NSPEE, there's an S missing core memory, which also contains those session tokens to then laterally move inside the Active Directory. On the right side, we're already in the AD, we try to move to the DC. That's our goal, we want to deploy ransomware, something like that, if we're a ransomware group. Now, where do we investigate? Like, if we look at the remote code execution, we obviously try to investigate on the appliance itself, because we want to verify, was it attacked, was it exploited, is the attacker still on the appliance itself, or has he already dumped the memory and has gone further? So we have to focus on the appliance, and as we already saw, analyzing appliance is not that easy, it's not that common. We need to pick up some tricks from our sleeves. On the right side, as the attacker is already inside your machines and already has those sessions, we need to investigate those sessions. We need to investigate, are there any suspicious sessions? Are there any sessions using multiple IPs or sessions using weird IPs, something like that? And that's a bit hard for us, as from a forensic point of view sometimes, because we can't really know, is this IP legit for this company or is it not legit? Obviously, if it's like 3 a.m. and it's coming from Russia, it's probably not really legit, but we need some context and we don't have it, so the customer needs to help here. And then lastly, how to investigate it? Well, on the left side, as I said, we need to analyze the appliance itself, so we need to take a disk analysis, a disk image or something like that, and take a look at it to confirm if there was successful exploitation and if we need to continue our investigations into the AD or the environment itself. On the right side, As already said, we need to check for suspicious login patterns, which is not that easy sometimes, and we can dump the NSPEE memory again, as the attacker did. Basically, we do it ourselves because we can just check there for requests. Now, you might ask yourself on the right side, why don't you just check logs or something like that, or look for like requests to the malicious endpoint? Well, because those logs or those requests are not documented by Citrix. So there's a blog from Mandiant, and they basically had a report regarding this, regarding Citrix Bleed 1, and as they say, those requests are just not logged. So basically, if I take a look at the appliance, I can't confirm it was exploited by Citrix Bleed 1. I can look into this memory dump, which I take myself, because it contains some requests, but it does not tell me if those requests were successful or not. So it's a bit hard to verify was it successful or not, because I'm not really sure about it. Also on the bottom, as you can see, there's small note, which is really important. Confirming past investigation, past compromise, also really difficult because there is one log which might help us, but it's rotated after 24 hours. So if the compromise was a week ago, it's a bit hard. So let's take a step back and look at the disk analysis. So basically, someone calls us or someone is compromised from either Citrix or the other unnamed RCE. What can you do to verify was it compromised or not? So this appliance, so this Citrix appliance is basically running a hardened FreeBSD kernel or customized, and we can't really run stuff on it. So there's no EDR running out, no AV, no security solutions. So we need to get to the disk. Now, as we can't really run stuff on it, we need to use another machine, then use SSHFS, and basically remotely mount this appliance to another analysis machine. And then we can do something like using 4 or 4Lite for some quick wins because we're looking for web shells, and basically the directories where those web shells are stored are mostly the same, so we know it. And we can just look there, or else if we want to do a deep dive, we can do a UAC image, so Unix artifact collector, and look at the logs and artifacts to get a bit more insights when, where happened what, and what can we do. And basically, if you do not patch in time, what do you get? You get web shell number 1, web shell number 2, web shell number 3, web shell number 4. And as I said at the beginning, we had 4 Citrix vulnerabilities. Allow me to proudly welcome member number 5, which is just 3 days old. It's called Citrix Delp. It's basically a bleed, but in reverse, as you might have imagined. It was released 3 days ago. Citrix NetScaler is not affected by using the default configuration, but affected if you use it as a gateway, which is sometimes the case. It's, again, RCE, so if you use Citrix, call your IT now, probably, or you can have a nice weekend. And, yeah, so that's, again, data from Shadow Server. We have 4.3K affected devices in Germany alone. Maybe someone of you has one, I don't know. Which brings us to our last case, Fortinet FortiGate. Again, we start with the attack surface. So what are we looking at? And FortiGate, so in this case, we're looking at 2 CVEs, which are basically the same. So if you patch the one, you already patch the other one, and let's just say they're the same, more or less. So we can see here, against year worth of data, we started like 45K affected devices, probably a bit more because the cutoff. And it gradually drops because people are realizing, oh, shit, I have an RCE, I need to patch now. It takes some time, as you can see, but we're getting to the end, more or less. So this vulnerability affects or targets the often exposed web-based management interface. You don't need to have it exposed to the internet. It makes your life easier as administrator, but you also allow vulnerabilities to affect you. So don't do it. And basically, if you abuse this vulnerability, you can take over SSL VPN sessions. So again, here's more timeline to showcase when was first compromise detected, when was a bulletin release, stuff like that. So on the left, we can see from Arctic Wolf on the 16th November 2024. They saw first probing for this vulnerability. So threat actor was probing, was checking if some devices are vulnerable. It was no exploitation yet, just probing. Some weeks later, we had some first exploitations on the 4th of December. And roughly 1 month later, we had a public advisory from FortiGate detailing this vulnerability. and offering a patch. Now, again, the guys from Watchtower, they're pretty quick. They took a look at this advisory, did some patch diffing, stuff like that, and came up with a POC. They released it, and mass exploitation shortly followed. Now, again, here we have a bit other dates, but as you can see, like from advisory to the POC, it's like roughly 2 weeks, and we have 2 months from the first vuln scans to the advisory. So basically, at least 2 months where at least one threat actor, I don't know, took advantage of this vulnerability. Now, back to our case. So basically, our case involved the threat actor called Keylene. They're a ransomware threat actors. So like to ransom your systems and steal your confidential data to make a double extortion, so you paid twice. Now, we had an issue here because, as you can imagine, to verify if you're being exploited by this vulnerability, you need some kind of logs. Now, those logs, they exist. They are in the FortiGate itself. Fortinet also sells you something called FortiAnalyzer. It's basically a data lake where you can push all your security logs from all your Fortinet data inside. You got like all centralized, it's really nice. The issue here is this FortiAnalyzer system, or this VM, it's mostly not really considered in the security posture or policies. It's not a tier 0 system for many companies, so it can also get ransomed, which means all logs are destroyed. Now, the FortiGate itself, it stored some logs for a few days, but it didn't store for like months back or dating back. So we can still use them a little bit. Additionally, which was really funny, the customer had Defender, so Microsoft Defender, using Defender for Cloud. And unknowingly, he pushed some logs to Defender for Cloud. He didn't really knew it, but we can use it for investigations, which was really nice, because without it would be pretty hard. So yeah, here logs in FortiGate. We can use them to look at those logs and verify if this exploit was abused. If you have a FortiGate and FortiAnalyzer, like consider it placed as a tier 0 system and securely deposit your logs somewhere safe. Now, in our case, the attacker abused this vulnerability, took over some VPN sessions or created some VPN sessions for unused administrative accounts. So he didn't create new accounts, but already used existing accounts, which is a bit better for blending in sometimes. Create new VPN tunnels and modified some policies to access critical systems from his VPN account. So then using some logs, like from the Defender for Cloud, like the FortiGate logs in the Defender for Cloud and the existing FortiGate logs inside the FortiGate itself, we could reconstruct the timeline a bit. So when was the attacker active and what was he doing on the endpoint, stuff like that. And using that, we could create like a timeline that's obviously not a full timeline, it's much more in detail, and it's also obviously redacted. But as you can see on the top, you have like this .4 tunnel IP, you also have the .2 tunnel IP, and they're working simultaneously, so at least 2 guys working together for Kalin and ransoming the environment. This is more bonus. There's a nice report about Coathanger or Umbrella Stand, which is a malware specific for FortiGate firewalls. It's really stealthy, so it's made for stealth and long operations. It can hook syscalls, it can survive firmware upgrades and reboots, which is really nasty. So also a lot of attention here on FortiGate for threat actors. And lastly, maybe third time's the charm, I don't know. There's a post, just be cautious, this might be a fake. We don't really know. There's apparently a 0-day RCE on sale for FortiGate. It might be true, it might be false. We don't have more information about it. But let's just hope it's, well, false, because, yeah, I value my weekends, to be honest.
Yeah, I will keep the rest really short. Couple of measures to protect your edge infrastructure. Don't expose the management interface. Create some visibility by storing logs and deploying a proxy or a web application firewall. Install updates immediately, don't wait. And installing updates isn't the silver bullet, so it doesn't magically fix it if it's already compromised. There are some solid recommendations by the Dutch. Here are a couple of links to stay up to date and a couple of tools that we mentioned. And with that, in case you want to stay up to date on our latest research, consider following us, and thank you for your attention.
Any questions?
Do you guys have questions for now?
There's one.
case there are a couple more questions, find us after the event is over. Yeah, we're a bit short on time, I guess.
Oh yeah. On the cases that you've worked with the Citrix log, that would actually be helpful. How many customers have logged that actually on a remote location where you could have used it to be effective in an investigation?
Could you repeat the question again, please?
With the Citrix vulnerability, where you said, okay, Citrix is not logging the connections or the logons. You mentioned that there is one log, a specific log type that would help, but nobody stores it?
Which is rotated after 1 day, you mean?
Ah, okay. And if it would, if you would store it in a remote location, you could use it later on, right?
Normally you could use it. So another thing you could do is obviously you can place something before your Citrix, which would record requests like a WAF or proxy, whatever, which would make your life, I think, a bit easier because you also maybe have indication what's successful or not. And you can look back further in the past than just 1 day, because 1 day is not enough.
Yeah.
So,
did you encounter customers with or was it usually that they would not use it, or?
Yeah, mostly don't use it. Like default Citrix just standing there, and what happened, we don't know most of the time. You also have, of course, syslogs, which you can customize and forward to your Zim or something like that, which is also sadly not really used, but that's something I would recommend on all your appliances, because your appliances are reachable from the internet, so you don't know if there's a new vulnerability tomorrow. So just be prepared, have your logs. You don't always need to have some use case, something like that for it, but just store them at least, because your forensic guys will thank you for that, and your insurance too.
Perfect, thank you.
There's another?
Quick.
Hi, I wonder, I didn't saw any forensic analysis based on memory forensics on the FreeBSD devices. Why not?
So first of all, there was I think it was a proprietary memory image on the Citrix, you mean, probably, and most of the times we didn't really need it in our case. So everything we need to know we could find out via UAC and forensic analysis of the disk image, but sure, it makes sense in some cases to also use your memory images.
Okay, thank you.
So in case there are other questions, we'll be drinking beer in 50 minutes down there, so just join us.
Okay, thank you very much, Eugen.
Thank you.